Laura Dwyer Schlecke, Bill Schlecke, Jackie Austin. You're from Thinking Real Estate. Is Bill actually part of Thinking Real Estate?
Negative.
He's our on-site counsel.
Okay.
Not that we
That's
need legal counsel.
Legal counsel, not counsel. Legal counsel.
Is
But
that-
no, I'm not part of
Not
Thinking
city
Real
council,
Estate.
not.
I'm just a
Psychological
special
counsel.
guest.
Special guest.
He's an ongoing special guest. So speaking of special guests, we have this debate because
Here we go.
I did not get good reviews on the show last week.
And I got great reviews.
And he got great, but he gets his great reviews from his buddies at Starbucks. So you buddies at Starbucks?
It's not just buddies at Starbucks.
Oh,
People at the
give
gym,
me a break.
everybody. Okay?
Yeah, they claim they like substance better than not.
rather-
I'm kind of
rather-
offended that they don't think I have substance.
They like
Okay.
substance. They like substance rather than fluff.
Oh, okay. So I hope they're listening because they now.
Yeah, that would be Ed Southworth,
Uh-huh.
Chris Rowley, Troy Ganton, Tom Hunsdorfer, who else is part? Kevin Knight. All these are the
You
guys.
sure you want me to
guys-
have their names?
These are the guys that sit around, and Mike Halaka, who all sit around the table at Starbucks, shooting the breeze while I'm working, actually. I sit there at the computer, I'm working, and
Oh, sure
they,
he is. I'll
they
call
create,
him and he cuts
anytime.
me off.
Do it anytime.
Yeah,
Anytime.
yeah.
I cut you off just because I'm working.
Oh, that's not true. You cut me off because you were there with your boys.
That's not the expression I use.
Well, I wonder if they'll think that's substance.
I don't know.
Anyhow,
Okay, onward and upward,
just listening.
Laura.
it's
Yeah.
a family show.
Onward and upward.
You had an answer to a question last week.
Yeah, we were talking about
Refresh the question.
Greg asked whether or not a snowplow run by the city, if it hit a car, whether or not the city's liable. And I said I didn't know the answer to that. I knew there were some exceptions to governmental immunity because the rule is, this is both common law and by statute, that you cannot sue government entities or agencies for tort liability. It has nothing to do with contracts, has nothing to do with nuisance and those sorts of things, but for tort liability, which is what hitting a car with a snowplow would be. And then the government or the state has to create certain exceptions in order for you to sue them. It turns out there are 6 statutory exceptions to governmental immunity, 3 of which I was familiar with. That's the highway exception, if there's a defect in the highway, the public building exception. You get injured in a public building, the state says
Because
you
of
can sue.
neglect, you mean?
Well, it's
I
neglect.
mean, somebody
or
pushes
something
me
like that.
down in a public building.
Right, that has nothing to do.
Okay.
I'm talking about a defect in a public building, and then what's known as a proprietary function exception, where the government is operating a business or doing something that isn't considered a, quote, governmental function, end quote. So those are the 3 with which I'm familiar, but there is one called the motor vehicle exception that says government agencies shall be liable for bodily injury and property damage, and those terms are important in a recent case. But bodily injury and property damage resulting from the negligent operation by any officer, agent, or employee of the governmental agency of a motor vehicle of which the government agency is the owner. So the answer to the question, Greg, is yes. The
What if
government
I-
is liable if that happens. You can go after them for bodily injury and property damage. There's a recent case that said where a husband sued, I think it was the husband sued for loss of consortium, the loss of companionship, etc. And the court said the statute
Which
limits
is what Bill
it.
would sue for if something ever happened to me.
Right. And so the court said that no, you can't go for loss of consortium because that's not, quote, bodily injury, nor is it property damage. So the government, the exception for government liability is limited to damages for those 2 things. Anyway, so there's the answer. There's the answer to your question.
So if one of the contractors for the city is a tree cutter and they damage property as a result of cutting a tree down in the extension, which is owned by the city, right? And they damage our house or they damage our shrubs or what have you, is the city responsible for replacing them?
I believe the tree cutter would be.
Right, not the city, because it's not the negligent operation of a motor vehicle. It's not within the defective highway exception, and it's not within the defective building section. As long as the contractor is doing it on behalf of the city as part of a governmental function, clearing the right of way, et cetera, it's the government is not liable. But the private contractor certainly would be.
Okay. Nice.
All right?
Yeah, because I'm thinking, a snowplow driver could just drive around and just run cars over for the heck of it.
Well, you gotta remember that this.
I will
keep
tell you,
score.
our
Yeah, but-
staff
but
would
no,
never
hold on.
do that.
Hold on.
We have awesome.
I didn't say the city of Jackson.
Okay, I'm
That's
just-
not negligence, that's a deliberate act.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
with respect to a deliberate act, certainly the employee is liable, it's not cloaked with immunity. I don't know,
Okay.
since the government didn't sanction it, didn't authorize it, the government's not gonna be liable, but certainly the drivers. The driver would be criminally liable as well.
Okay.
We can
All right.
have open mic. If anyone has any questions, they can
Sure.
call 787-3397.
Love to hear from you.
Okay, so I have a couple of things I want to talk about as a result of listening to your show this morning.
Oh, good. Okay.
Apparently
Thanks
there's
for listening.
Apparently there's legislation that a tenant has to get permission if they're going to grow marijuana.
Right. Well, it's pending legislation.
Okay, so my question is, don't they have to get permission to do that anyway?
No, if you as a landlord, you don't have a restriction against certain activities, and as long as that activity is permitted within the zoning district, tenant is entitled to use the premises for whatever lawful purposes that exist. So you as a landlord, if you want to stop smoking of cigarettes or marijuana or anything else, you put into your lease that this is prohibited. Even though the law permits it, you as a private contractual matter prohibit it. So you would have to put in there no growing of marijuana. You put that in your rules and regulations for the apartment complex, or you put it right in the
So
lease.
if I don't put it in that lease or in my rules and regulations, and someone's a medical marijuana patient or grows it, or their caregiver, they can automatically do that.
As long as it's permitted by state and federal and local law.
What if I've,
I use the word federal here. It's probably as long as it's permitted by the state and local law, the local ordinance, and you haven't prohibited in your lease. By what authority are you going to stop it as a landlord?
I don't know, I just heard that on Greg's show this morning, then I wanted to.
You mean the proposed legislation?
Uh-huh,
Yeah, I
uh-huh.
knew the legislation had been proposed so that it puts the burden on the tenant in order to be able to do it, irrespective of what the lease says, irrespective of what the rules and regs say. The tenant would have to, under this proposed
And
statute.
that's not a violation of HIPAA or whatever the
No,
medical thing is, where now
No,
I'm
it's not
disclosing to you that I have a medical issue?
Well, no.
No,
growing
if it is,
marijuana-
we'll never get out of committee.
No.
And it might not get out of committee anyway.
I don't
It's
think
in
there's a
committee.
HIPAA issue. The issue has to do with the ADA and the Persons with Disabilities Civil Rights Act, and whether or not because the state and the state agencies and instrumentalities in the cities are subject to those statutes. And so the question would be, can you legislate something as the state legislature which violates the PDCRA or the ADA? And the answer is no, you can't. So that's probably the major issue, at least if the growing of marijuana is for medical marijuana
Yeah.
purposes and not
Can't
for
stop people from
recreational
taking
use.
their medications.
Right.
Well, no,
But-
there's a big issue right now as to whether or not a landlord or an owner or a tenant in a public facility or a place that's open to the public, whether or not you have to permit that use of medical marijuana in that place. And the Attorney General has already issued an opinion. And then, this is 2 years ago, and I don't think there's any court decision on it yet, but the decision or the opinion from the Attorney General was that a private property owner or a mall owner, et cetera, could stop the use of medical marijuana within the private premises, that there was nothing in the law, in the ADA or in the PDCRA, which prohibited the landlord or the owner from doing so.
And do you think that there's a difference between a caregiver? So I don't use medical marijuana myself, however, I'm a caregiver. I have
But
a
you might
license-
someday.
Maybe, who knows?
Well, you know.
I'm using this as an example. So a caregiver grows it and is entitled to grow X amount of plants. We won't get into that number, but
12 per patient.
right. So, but as a patient, I can smoke it, and maybe I don't grow it, or I could grow my own plants. But do you think there's a distinct difference between a caregiver and a patient?
Yeah.
So maybe as a
Because
landlord,
as a landlord, I mean,
I might let
my
you
initial
smoke.
concern is the smoking of marijuana on the premises and affecting my other tenants with the smoke, and that's one issue. The other is a caregiver. If I'm not using medical marijuana, I'm not permitting the use in my premises as a caregiver.
Right.
The only other issue for the landlord is the use of electricity or other resources.
Or what if they
the
grow more
groceries.
than they're legally supposed to? Are the premises up for?
You don't know. The
No?
forfeiture, unless the landlord knows that it's going on and doesn't take action to stop it, the forfeiture statute under state and federal law, it's not automatic. You got to demonstrate that the landlord is either actively participating in it or knew about it and
Turn their
tacitly condoned it. Right?
Okay. All right. So then, kind of along the same line, let's say I rent space as a business owner, and
You're renting space as a tenant, you mean?
yes,
Go ahead.
and a smoke shop goes in next door to me. Do I have any recourse on stopping such a thing because the smoke will pour into my space?
No.
Probably not, as long as the smoke shop is operating within the zoning ordinance. When you as a
What would
business
you-
owner move in, go ahead, sorry.
I mean, what would your complaint be?
Smoke in my own shop. I wouldn't want smoke in my shop. So I'm a flower shop, and I
Okay.
have next door a smoke shop goes
Yeah.
in, and you go in there and you smoke your cigars or
Right.
your hookahs or whatever it might be, and that smoke comes into my space because of the way the build out is. Do I have any recourse against the landlord?
I would
Well,
say you might.
About the first question I was raising was whether you had some sort of action against a smoke shop or anything like that. Only if a smoke shop is causing a nuisance.
Wow, I thought my phone was loud.
And the issue is whether or not the smoke is constituting a nuisance. Then you might have a cause of action against a smoke shop. But as long as it's operating legally within the ordinance, that's going to be a bit difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. But would you have a cause of action against the landlord? Maybe. Depends upon what your lease says. Depends upon whether or not the intrusion of smoke renders the premises, I don't want to say uninhabitable, but renders it not suitable for the business use.
Are you taking calls?
Yeah, but
Good morning.
So what about beer farts?
What did he say? I have no. You'll have to tell me later.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
Those calls are
That-
stupid.
yeah.
Waste of
Yeah.
time. But I mean, if you were leasing space and smoke came into the space, you'd be livid. I would be livid. I wouldn't want to smell it. So how would you handle that if it was you?
I wouldn't rent space in a building that
If
was
it's you,
zoned
you're
for that
already
particular use.
You're already a tenant. And you're in I assume.
That's why I own my own office
Oh,
building, so
stop
I have
it!
to worry
Stop
about
it! So you're a tenant. You're selling flowers. And so that's retail. I would assume selling cigarettes and cigars and pipes and all that stuff is retail.
If I put in a flower shop and I am in a space that has a common wall with another retail space and the smoke shop use is permitted, then I better, as the flower shop, put in a restriction in the lease that says so long as I'm leasing there or under the exercise of any option, the owner will not rent to a smoke shop or some other noxious use. I can do that if I think far enough ahead.
Yeah, but if you're the flower shop and you've been there 3 or 4 years,
You
who
may,
would think about that?
well, again, you may be out of luck. What happens is you're there, you got 2 more years on your lease, and you simply say at the end of the 2 years, I'm out of here.
Really?
I moved to
And
a
the
different
cost
space.
of moving and changing my location and risking the fact
As-
that I'm
as
gonna lose
long as-
customers is my problem and not the landlord's.
You know, you might look at you're a city council person, what does your ordinance say about smoke shops and whether or not they have to be in a standalone building or can they be in an adjacent space with a common wall? Your ordinance may actually already address this. I
Well,
don't
I'll
know.
look that up.
Well, you're a city council person, don't you know the ordinances by heart?
Oh, you're just
You know,
trying to get
I-
pat on
she-
the back by your
She-
Starbucks buddies.
she's been on the council for 2 years. You'd think she'd memorize the entire code of ordinances of the
Be
city
a
of
lot of.
Jackson.
He could do it. Bill could do it.
I wouldn't want to.
Yeah, but you could.
I wouldn't want to. So anyway, so maybe the ordinance already addresses that.
Okay, I'll look it up. Or I'll have some lawyer look it up.
I mean, maybe the smoke shop is objecting to the smell of the roses from next door. So they've got a nuisance claim.
Okay.
All right, what else you got?
You come up with something now.
You told me.
I
that.
gave you two.
You told me that.
Do you have any houses?
Everything else would be,
Fluff.
no, everything else would take longer to talk about. So if you have a question, 787-3397.
Yeah, call.
But you have to, if you call in your gag thing, we have caller ID here, so.
Well, we do.
That's right. Don't all the callers have those throwaway phones with a single number that just doesn't mean anything?
What else? There was something else in your news report that I wanted to
But the
address.
weather in
Something
Sochi
from
is
the
warmer
council
than
meeting?
here.
No,
No. What do you think of the water tower?
I don't think much about
The water tower has to be repainted
Okay.
every 10 years. It's state, it's a regulation, so. Unfortunately, we would probably like to take that money it's costing us to do that and put it towards something else, but we can't. For those of you who think it's wasted money, it's,
You talking about
A
city
regulation.
council business now? I'm thinking
no,
real
I
estate?
just thought of that because I saw an article where people were voting on water tower designs.
Actually, what she wanted to talk about today before we got sidetracked on the question from last week and the news report this morning is she wants to talk about some of the things that buyers ought to think about when they're negotiating for the purchase of the property. And
Well,
I've
or-
given her a couple of ideas, but we'll end up talking about that next week.
Right,
Not
and
this
you know,
week.
like, how do you flip a home? There's, you know, those days are changing, flipping homes. Although I think it'd probably be easier because our market's increasing. Although, how many houses do we have listed, Jackie, on the market overall?
Well,
The whole
last Thursday it was 786.
786, which is a few more than last week.
Sure.
And typically there's 1,200 homes listed. So it's a huge shortage. In fact, one of our buyers wants Northwest Schools, and every house she sends me has already got an offer on it. So if you got a home in Northwest Schools, call me.
Call.
780-3800. Let's see. Oh, and we had a sick staff this week, so I don't have my list of new listings. Got one
Go
coming
online.
up on Grand River. It's 1982 Grand River,
Yep.
Where's
which
that?
is Northwest Schools,
Grand
Grimes
River?
Junction. Yeah.
Okay.
And when you're looking for a house on Grand River, you have to be careful because there's no consistency to the house numbers. You know, on your house, if I come to your house and you tell me your address is 123,
Mm-hmm.
you're probably right next door to 125 and 121. Not on Grand River. You could be at 1982. Your neighbor's address could be 2,000 and something. And on the other side, it could be 3,000 something.
And that's in Rives?
Uh-huh. I think it's kind of dangerous because if you're emergency medical, how are you ever going to find these people unless you know that street really well?
So you have an open house?
No open houses. We don't do them.
Oh, that's right.
We don't start them until March. And who knows with this snow if anybody can get to houses yet in March. But the market is, if you're a seller, it's time to put them on the market. But this house on Grand River sits on almost 15 acres, wooded, and then there's like a 5-acre pasture for horses. About a little less than 1,200 square feet. It's listed for $149,900. Nice house. All set, ready to go. 2-car detached garage, full basement. What else could you want?
Horses?
Horses. Great place to go snowshoeing.
Oh. Cross-country skiing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Jackie and I went snowshoeing on Sunday or Saturday, one of those days, and we just sank. It was so fluffy. Unbelievable. It was hard.
Yeah, well, that's not
Hard
going
to
to be
do.
the case after the next week.
Yeah,
or
it's
so.
gonna
Yeah.
get icy.
Right, right.
Let's
So
hear-
call you
780-3800.
on the worldwide?
And you know what? Maybe we should do a fundraiser to see which format of this show is better. Bill's monologues?
We better not.
Bill doesn't deliver a monologue. You asked me a question, I simply answered the question.
Oh, whatever.
So if
Legal
you want me,
aids.
if you want me to come back as a guest,
Oh,
you better be
threats.
nice to me.
Yeah, threats.
See you next week.
Ciao.
All right.